Hello Team FD and welcome back to Transfer Review, where Pat and I put silly season underneath the microscope. This is normally on EFD, you lucky devils, but because we can't exactly do winners and losers in the absence of games, and there's been so many interesting transfers, we're doubling down, baby, starting with Higuain to Milan, according to Calcio Mercato. Give us some context around this move and around AC Milan in general, because they're a club in turmoil, or at least were a couple of months ago.
Yeah, there's a lot of turnover there, and former player and manager Leonardo is going to take over as general manager, it seems.
Again.
And he wants to make a splash by signing Gonzalo Higuain. Now, of course, Juve probably need to let him go in order to free up some cash so that they can pay Cristiano Ronaldo's astronomical wages. And Milan are kind of in the need of a PR coup. They've gone for Morata, they've gone for Benzema, they've had a look at Ciro Immobile, and now finally they're at Higuain, who I think is probably the worst bet of the four. Now, they've been having issues with financial fair play. They're originally banned from European competition. That's since been overturned. They failed to break even, unsurprisingly, after they spent 200 mil on transfers last season. Some successful, some a little bit less so. It seems that the money's a little bit more solid now, though. They were worried because there was Lee Yong-hong, who was the kind of Chinese guy who'd taken over the company, who'd taken over the club with the help of an American hedge fund. Then it turned out that he couldn't provide enough money to kind of safeguard the investment.
Yeah.
So in the end, Elliott took over. That's the name of the hedge fund. And now they're running things. So now it seems like there is money to spend, that Milan will be financially stable. Whether they'll be stable in football terms is a different question, because I do not like this move.
Yeah, it's a very good point. You've got a question. At this point in his career, is he worth 50 million? How much primo Higuain do you get for this big old chunk?
Yeah, for me, the question is, if you're running a club like Chelsea, what's the biting point for you? What's the point at which you say, yeah, we'll take him for that amount? Because for me, it's way below 50.
Yeah.
I think if you say to me, maybe I can get him for 30, 35, I'd probably think about it if I really need a striker, not if I'm Chelsea.
Yeah, 30 million was the immediately sprung to mind. Obviously, very hard to quantify in this market, but if they're going to resell someone like Morata for around 60,
Yeah.
who I believe has a much higher ceiling than his first season would dictate at Chelsea, then Higuain for 30 sounds about reasonable, given that Higuain's 31 in December, I believe.
Yeah.
And I'd be a little bit alarmed at sort of his drop-off as well. Higuain only scored 16 goals in the league last season, his lowest return in Italy to date. More worryingly, his shot numbers have halved in 17-18, compared to that stellar 15-16 campaign for Napoli. Now, that was Higuain at his best.
Sure.
So it's always going to, maybe not compare favourably. However, more alarmingly, shots in the box, which is where he's most lethal, are down from 3.5 to 1.9 in that same period.
That's a huge drop.
Yeah.
1.9 is not bad, but it's not really elite. 3.5 was not only elite, it's insanely high, right?
Yeah, you just don't want to be paying £50 million when all the data suggests that things are only going to get worse from here on in. Whereas with Morata, a good coach will improve his numbers twofold, you'd imagine. Now, going back to AC Milan very briefly, they might have issues at the other end of the pitch, as the Mirror have reported that Leonardo Bonucci has requested to leave after a single season. Instead, a 31-year-old is extremely unhappy at the way the club has been run. Following the European ban, he wanted to depart. Now he's 31 now, that's understandable. He wants to play in sort of Europe's premier competitions at the tail end of what has been a great career. But he said that Jose Mourinho is keeping a very close eye on him after being priced out of a move for Toby Alderweireld. Now, that would be very interesting, because he ticks multiple boxes for Manchester United, doesn't he? In that they don't currently have a centre-back who is able to step out of defence, who is a competent distributor. So I think he'd be a really welcome addition, albeit a little bit short-term. But, saying that, 31, I could see, Bonucci playing to the same age as a Barzagli or as a Chiellini. He's not someone that necessarily exerts a lot of physical energy in his style of play. He's not wholly combative, is he? He's a bit more of an interceptor, a distributor. He uses his head more than his feet, let's say. So I think that might be quite a wise move for Manchester United. What do you make of it?
I agree that it would make sense, if they can't get Alderweireld, and while Alderweireld's a couple of years younger, he's not that much younger and his injury record's a lot worse. My worry is if you do want him to play into his late 30s, you might need to protect him in a back three, which is obviously is when he was at his best for Juventus. And that's not something that Mourinho has traditionally done. I think if you're playing him in a back four, you've got to rely on your fullbacks and probably Eric Bailly doing an awful lot of legwork for him. But if that's what you really want, that distributor from the back, if that's the most important thing to you, then there's almost nobody in the world better than Bonucci. I'd probably go for him over Alderweireld, all else being equal, I guess.
Yeah, that is interesting because when Montella bought him, he actually converted AC Milan to a back three. And then when Gattuso came back in, he changed it back to a 4-3-3. So Bonucci has been playing in a 4 and they've been tighter at the end of the season. So I guess it wouldn't be totally alien to him, yeah. But AC Milan fans, what does your ideal summer look like? Let us know in the comments below. Moving on to Martial to Chelsea of all people.
Wow. Yes, Sky Sports claim that Chelsea, as well as Dortmund and Bayern Munich, are interested in buying Anthony Martial from Man United. Now, I think this is an interesting kind of question of how Martial wants his career to progress. At Bayern, they're absolutely stacked with wide options, right? They've got Kingsley Coman, who's barely getting a minute. They've got Serge Gnabry, who's arriving for his first season at the Allianz. Of course, Robben and Ribery have had their contracts re-upped. So I think if he went there, you might see his long-term future as a centre-forward as Lewandowski ages out. Dortmund, similarly, they need a centre-forward. They've, again, got decent wide options. You'd imagine he probably played both roles there because of the way that attack works, but they're yet to buy a recognised centre-forward. Chelsea, on the other hand, you'd expect him to play on the wing. Yeah. Like, as an inside forward, admittedly, his chief role is going to be getting goals, but centre-forward wise, they've got absolutely tons of them, as we discussed before. Plus, you have to imagine they'd need to pay United a fortune to get him. This is Mourinho. Of course, he once refused to let Arsenal take Demba Ba on loan when he was at Chelsea. I mean, he's perfectly willing to cut off the club's proverbial financial nose to spite their face. So, I don't know. They'd have to spend a lot, but if they get 60 to 70 million for Willian, then you've got to think that turning that round and getting Anthony Martial is pretty good business. If you could essentially swap Martial for Willian, I'm hugely in favour of that, as good as Willian is.
Yeah, Martial certainly offers more in the way of end product, doesn't he? 0.8 goals plus assists per 90 compared to Willian's 0.6 last season. But the Brazilian definitely better in the build-up, much more of a creator, isn't he? Much more competent at getting his side up the pitch during the transition. 2.9 chances created per 90, 3 successful take-ons with a 67% success rate, which is sky high in the Premier League. Martial, on the other hand, 1.9 chances created, 2.4 take-ons with a 51% success rate. But you and I have discussed this before. Whoever plays in that left-hand sided position for Mourinho, it tends to be relied on as more of a second striker than an out-and-out creator, right?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Rashford, Martial, they're expected to chip in with the goals, whereas that right-hand sided role for Chelsea tends to be a little bit more deeper, tends to have more of a creative burden, and Willian has often found himself kind of playing right wing back at times as well. Yeah. Defensively, they're both average around 1 tackle and interception per game, though Martial seems visibly frustrated when he's asked to do any defensive work. So would that be alleviated in this Chelsea system under Sarri? I'm not so sure. With a 4-3-3, we have seen sort of Insigne drop in the past, haven't we, picking the ball up from Gulam. I think he would have a little bit more license. I think he'd enjoy this style of play under Sarri a hell of a lot more. But like you said, the sticking point here is Manchester United's willingness to do business with Chelsea. How much do you think they would need to spend to prize him out of the club? And also, how much on a personal level, this might be hard for you to comment on, do you think it would have affected Martial seeing Ousmane Dembele lift the World Cup, seeing just being excluded from that experience? I think that's definitely going to spur him on to sort of facilitate a move. And I also kind of feel the same with Kingsley Coman at Bayern Munich. These are two players that should be getting minutes at this point in their career. And I think they'd both take moves to lesser sides, let's say, like Dortmund, to make that happen.
Yeah, I think
that's my instinct.
Yeah, it must be kind of rough, especially on Martial more than Coman, I think, in a way, because last season, in the minutes he got, he couldn't really have done more.
Yeah.
to earn more minutes. Like every time he played, he was really, really good, as you pointed out there. 0.8 goals and assists per 90. He's hyper elite. And so I don't really know what else he could have added. I think he would arguably have been a more worthy substitute at the World Cup than a Thauvin or even a Fekir or a Lamar. Yeah, I think he's probably gunning for a move now. And when you look at Chelsea, when you look at the numbers that Sarri got out of Callejon at Napoli, then he must think to himself, I'm more talented than him. I could actually get some pretty amazing numbers here. Kingsley Coman obviously linked with a move to Arsenal. Now that may not be the dream if you once thought of yourself as being a starter at Bayern Munich, but after a certain period of time, it doesn't really matter how prestigious the club is that you're at if you're not getting on the field. So I agree in that regard. If I were Martial, unless Bayern Munich would give you assurances and say, look, Robben and Ribery, they've got one more year, and then it's going to be you and Kingsley Coman, then for me, it would be Dortmund. I'd try and go to Dortmund with a really good buyout clause. And I'd probably pay, I think his market value at the moment is at least £70 million, Anthony Martial.
I think that's on the more conservative end of the spectrum as well. I certainly think Manchester United could drive at that price even more. But what do you guys think? If you were Anthony Martial, would you depart Manchester United this season for Chelsea? Let us know in the poll just above, yes or no.
Next up, we head over to Everton, and Richarlison might be doing the same thing. Apparently, Brazilian forward might be on his way out of Watford. Tell me about the transfer, tell me about the fee.
Yeah, news of this broke Friday, didn't it? So it might be confirmed by the time this video goes live or shortly after. And the price has differed from source to source. Sky Sports say it's 40 million quid. Globo Esporte, who are pretty consistent when it comes to Brazilians, say it's around 45. So we think it's going to rest somewhere between those two figures. Now, the fee rumoured is so large, apparently, because there's a bit of a premium on it in terms of Everton and Watford kind of smoothing relations, let's say, following Everton's pursuit of Marco Silva halfway through the season last season. Okay. So maybe Watford have stuck another 5 or 10 on there because they effectively curtailed the Hornets' Premier League season after January, didn't they? Now, Everton fans may be a little bit wary given the fee because they had their fingers burnt last season when it came to paying extortionate amounts for Gylfi Sigurdsson, for Davy Klaassen, and the fact that Richarlison didn't score a goal in all comps after November and didn't contribute to a goal after December rings a few alarm bells. But like I said, that also has a direct correlation with Watford's season, doesn't it? Not just Richarlison's season. And they only scored 44 goals. I think that was the 6th worst in the Premier League, and he contributed to 9 of those, which isn't that bad, Van Straten. And he did have a very, very bright start, and you are a big fan of his, aren't you?
Yeah, I think Richarlison's quite a rare talent. Like what he is able to do is get shots from good positions. It's what he was good at from his first game. First game in the Premier League, he had 4 shots. They were all from inside the box, and he created 2 chances. That's really impressive. And I think the difficulty comes when you're using him in a different role. So I don't think he's a true winger. He's more of an inside forward. He's not much of a creator. He's not a brilliant dribbler, though he can dribble a little. What you want him as is that kind of second striker arriving late in the box. So he averaged 2 dribbles. That's okay. That's fine. But he had 3.5 touches in the box back in October. Those are amazing numbers. Taking around 3.3 shots per game. Those are out and out striker numbers. XG suggested he should be scoring a goal every 3 games, which, considering he was a 20-year-old at that point, arriving in the Premier League for his first season after leaving Brazil, very, very impressive stuff.
And he actually underperformed. Yeah. He did
underperform expected goals. Expected goals basically suggest that he would have scored about 10 goals this season if he had a kind of average finishing. Now, you can say that was his fault, that he finished badly, and that's true. But the same goes for someone like Raheem Sterling. He always finished kind of badly. And actually, there are players who make their careers despite generally finishing slightly below expected goals. You know, like Zlatan Ibrahimovic over his career finished slightly below expected goals. Lewandowski is around expected goals. You know, these are players who've scored huge numbers of goals because they get chances.
So what we're saying is, for a 20-year-old, he's actually got a very mature sort of sensibility in terms of where to get shots off. It's just his finishing that is the issue at the moment.
Well, he's got the ability, to get shots, and we assume it's the combination of him and Marco Silva, right? If the numbers dropped off drastically after Silva left, you kind of think that it was something Silva was doing, or perhaps afterwards his drop-off was due to something that Gracia was doing. So it remains to be seen how he'd, gel with another manager, it might be that Silva just knows how to get the best out of him. But Everton clearly need this kind of player. They need goals. They need somebody who can show his pace on the wing a little bit. And Balassi and Walcott, they're fast, but both have unreliable fitness. Neither one, I mean, Walcott certainly is not a true winger. Morales needs to be sold. Ademola Lookman.
Cost 30 million, mate.
Well, Balassi, the thing is though, Everton fans will always defend these transfers. At the time we said don't buy Balassi, that's a huge amount of money for a not very good player. Everton fans were livid in the comments, they were wrong. Like we said don't buy Klaassen, same thing. We said don't buy Sigurdsson, it's a nightmare. And yet every time Everton fans are like, oh no, this is going to be a great move. This is the rare time where we're telling you, actually we think Richarlison will be really good. And yeah, overall it's just a sound investment in the club's attacking options going forward. When you look at their attack, Lookman aside, it's all pretty old. And Calvert-Lewin, I suppose.
I was going to ask you about
the rest are very old.
Selling Lookman to RB Leipzig for £18 million, given the sort of impression he made there in a very short amount of time, is an alarming piece of business, isn't it? Do you think this is to fund Richarlison? Because it's sort of going like for like to an extent, isn't it? But when RB Leipzig want one of your youngsters, my general thought is don't sell him to RB Leipzig because they are phenomenal at scouting talent.
Or sell him with a buyback or something. I mean, like, I completely understand that he needs to get minutes, and I don't know why they think they couldn't give him minutes, but maybe that's, you know, an important part of his development. Fair enough. And Lookman certainly might kick up a fuss if he feels he's going to be parked on the bench again. But Everton need to really clean house. Like, their attacking options are extremely deep, but not very good. You know, they've got Morales, they've got Nias, they've got Tosun, who was okay, but Tosun's one of the younger ones in this group at 27.
And very Allardyce.
Yeah, Balassi, Walcott, Sigurdsson, like so many of these guys who play in attacking positions just are too old and are not really going to pull their weight. So if I were running Everton, I'd probably say, you know what, we'll take Calvert-Lewin, we'll take Lookman, we'll take Richarlison, maybe we buy one other young winger, and we're just going to gamble on them going forward. That's how we're going to do it, and we're going to bin off all this dead wood.
Yeah, and that's why it was undoubtedly the right decision to part ways with Allardyce, despite that 8th place finish. I know we kind of steered them away from the bottom end of the table, didn't they? But they have just accumulated such a mismatch of talent.
Yeah,
and
a huge squad.
It could easily go downhill from here if Marco Silva doesn't come in and sort of sort that shit out straight away. What do you guys think? What needs to happen at Everton in order to make them a top 6 side? Let us know in the comments below. Time for the transfer shocker to end the show, but just before we do, we think it's worth touching upon Alphonso Davies, a Canadian talent who appears to be signing for Bayern Munich. News of this broke over the weekend on Twitter, and the Bavarians were pretty keen to wrap this up quickly, weren't they? So let's give you some context around the move, because it's definitely worth keeping your eye on. He's a 17-year-old Canadian, like I said, Ghanaian born in fact, who plays for the Vancouver Whitecaps. He's got 3 goals in 6 appearances for the Canadian national side. The fee is $12 million, according to The Athletic, which is a league transfer record at current. Second youngest player to play in the MLS, behind the one and only Freddie Adu.
What a player.
Reportedly still in the arms of Pele right now, but has since clocked up over 50 games in the US. Which is good, isn't it? He needs to get that. He needs to get that game time in order to make good on that talent. Primarily a winger, he completes a massive 4.5 dribbles per game and creates 1.3 chances for his teammate per 90. Similar numbers to Alexis Sanchez last season, so might be that kind of chaotic forward presence in the way that the Chilean is. Haven't watched it, but have watched highlights. An interesting player. If you can tell us any more about him, please do so below, because this is definitely the most buzz I've heard about a player in North America for quite some time. Obviously, Bayern Munich wouldn't be expecting him to step up anytime soon, but young, kind of, I want to say tricky for want of a better phrase, players tend to fare well in the Bundesliga. It's a league wherein kind of that one-on-one scenario is championed, isn't it? And it suits players of this style. So quickly, what do you think to this before we move into the transfer shocker, which is well and truly left wing?
Well, these are exactly the sort of smart moves you'd expect a club like Bayern Munich to make. You know, while they don't go and spend a huge amount of money on their top tier transfers, they do go and take gambles on these sorts of young players. And I think the great thing about the Bundesliga is they will find a way for him to get minutes. They'll loan him out, and he will probably play maybe Bundesliga 2, maybe the lower level of the Bundesliga.
He's going to rip it up for Hoffenheim next season.
It would be amazing. Like if they send him out to just like a kind of low, if he can go to a Bundesliga side rather than a Bundesliga 2 side, then he'll definitely be someone to keep an eye on next year, because we do see players break through at a younger age in the Bundesliga.
We have seen this before, though, in the form of Julian Green at Bayern Munich, and that didn't fare very well, did it?
Well,
although
he's your mate. Are you going to say that about him?
Decent season in the Bully 2 last season. Shout out to you, Julian.
Ask it.
Go on then, who's a transfer shocker?
It's Ruben Semedo, who apparently is joining Huesca on loan. Interesting stuff.
Huesca, is that not a sauce at the Peruvian chicken shop?
No, it's the drink that you get on the counter at Oaxaca. It's like in a little.
Oaxaca's bang average.
Well, yeah, it's a chain Mexican restaurant, mate.
Well,
what do you expect?
You
fly in the tomatoes.
You've made me look silly now.
Well, you are silly. Speaking of silly, Ruben Semedo got arrested earlier in the year for threatening a bouncer with a firearm, which is something we've all done. That's absolutely fine. Bouncers are but the accusations got a little bit worse. He was accused of attempted murder, illegal possession of a firearm, and robbery. He was arrested twice in the space of a month. Then he was arrested a third time, with the aim of getting him to stand trial. That's something that tends to happen with career criminals. He was suspended by Villarreal without pay during the second half of the season. Wouldn't have been able to play anyway because he was in the joint, mate. He was in prison. Idiot. Yeah, but he is now free. Both Semedos are out in the wild. He left jail earlier this week. He paid a €30,000 bail after spending 5 months behind bars. And now he's going to be back on our television screens playing what we can only assume will be the greatest football of his life.
When you said both Semedos out in the wild then, it reminded me of the long grass on Pokemon.
Mm-hmm. You encounter a wild Semedo.
You have run into a wild Semedo. Ruben uses pistol whip. If you enjoyed this, then please head on over to Euro Football Daily and watch the Euro roundup of the Bundesliga and La Liga. Patrick, any words of wisdom before we depart?
No, I'm done.
Pa-pow.
Stay out of trouble. Stay out of prison.